Okay. Thank you, Jacob. So, oh, you want me to introduce yourself, or you're introducing?
Yeah, we're recording now. Now it's recording. Welcome to the evening of Python coding. We usually in this meetup, we show a short demo about the Python library. And this month, Erik van Widenfelt, and you'll have to correct me for butchering your name, he's going to present not exactly a library, but a mechanism used in Python called Travis CI. And he will explain how to set up Python to libraries to work with Travis CI. So without much ado, Erik, please correct your name and please show us what we can do with Travis CI.
All right, thank you, Jake. Yeah, sure. So it's Erik van Widenfelt, but you did fine. Thanks a lot. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about how I use Travis CI for the projects that we work on. There are a lot of different ways you can use Travis CI. It's not necessarily, I think, tied to Python, but I'm just going to talk about how I use it for Python. The work I do is using Python and Django. So I've written a number of modules that sort of extend the Django framework to do clinical trial work. And in the sort of coding that we do, I use continuous integration to just to help with quality control and things like that. So let me just share my screen here. So I put this, can we all see that? Well, okay, you're all on mute, okay. So I put this up on, and you can look at the meetup page. There's the link to this as well. I don't know if it's too large or anything.
The link shows at the top. People can later look at the YouTube and pull it out.
So I just wanted to ask, is it too large on the screen? Because I had increased the type size.
It looks good. Thank you.
It looks good. All right. So what I put together here was just a simple a Django app. So for those of you who are, I think it was Patricia was talking about how she's doing working her way through Python. So this is now, if you wanted to get a little bit of experience with the Django framework, this is a pretty simple single form app that I put together. It's related to one that I'm using in production that is being embedded in some of our larger clinical trials as a quick form to start collecting information about knowledge and attitudes around COVID-19. So, but I just created this specifically for this talk. So let me just scroll down here. So what I use Travis CI for is it's all used together in combination with sort of making sure that my code conforms to the PEP8 rules for Python. So that'll be, when I run my Travis CI script, it's going to run Flake 8. And also that my code's going to run within the different...
Tell some people what PEP8 is. The reason is we have some novices always in this group. So just tell them.
So PEP8 is a series of rules that are laid out for Python, which pretty strictly says that this is the way you should do it in Python. And Python, as you may know, takes an approach that there's really only one way to do something. So PEP8 lays out some pretty strict rules about how you should write your code. And it mostly comes around formatting, since the format of your code is actually part of the syntax within Python. So there are a number of rules within PEP8. And there's a lot of them, so different people have written small packages that you can just run against a file or a Python module, and it'll tell you where within your code you violated different PEP8 rules. Just by violating a PEP8 rule doesn't necessarily mean that your code's not going to run, but it's a good idea to just get in the habit of following the PEP8 rules. So something like Flake 8, if you run it against your code, it will tell you if you've violated anything. And there's also something like Black. I don't know if people are familiar with Black, but if you Black will actually reformat your code for you so that you continue to follow not only PEP8, but a consistent way of formatting your code, which is very useful if you're, when you're pushing your code to GitHub and things like that, or diffing it, you're not seeing changes in formatting, because that's not really what's important. You just see where you've actually made code changes, and you can disregard any format changes. So black will ensure that it's consistent. And then if you're working with a team of people, if they all use black, then we're all formatting exactly the same way, and we can't really look at each other's code and tell by how it's formatted whether Erik wrote it or Jacob wrote it or somebody else wrote it. And you can even use black as a plugin for PyCharm, for example, and it'll do it automatically for you. But the topic, so that's the part of PEP8. The other part of using continuous integration is you do want to version your package. So at some point you'll get to a production version, but each time you push to GitHub and each time you create a version, you're going to want to make sure that all your tests pass. So that's the other part of it, that you're going to have a suite of tests against your code, and hopefully you'll have very high coverage of tests. So again, integrated into using Travis CI, you're going to use this coverage module, which you can also pip install. And what coverage does is it just checks that all the tests, for the tests that you have written, is there any part of your code that your tests don't touch? And that's obviously, if there's parts of your code that tests don't touch, then that's probably an area where maybe you've got some bug hiding that you haven't really tested very well, and at some point it's going to bomb out on you on a production system. Then the other thing you'll want to integrate, which is useful for Travis CI, is then in this continuous integration, is that you need to decide what operating system you're going to be running on, if it's just going to be one operating system or multiple. So you're probably working on a Windows machine or a Mac or something like that, but if you want to test it on multiple operating systems, you can do that through Travis CI. You can configure it for different operating systems. And at the same time, when it comes to Python, you're going to want to make a decision about which versions you're going to support. And you can, with Tox and Travis CI together, you can list out all the versions that you want your code to be tested against. And then in my case, Python and Django, I've got the versions of Python that I want to support and the versions of Django that I want to support. So there's a whole matrix of Python and Django versions, and I can list them out, and then Travis CI will run all of them in the cloud for me while I'm busy doing something else. So basically, making sure that my tests and my software will support the different environments that I might be running in. Now, for my case, I only run my systems on Linux boxes, and I've pretty much just support from, I don't really use Python 3.6 anymore, so I'll either do 3.7 or 3.8, and I've pushed all my code up to the latest version of Django, but I think I still probably support Django 2.2 as well. So I've just put some links here for you. You can follow up later. If you wanted to go to Tox, you can this is the read the docs about Tox. You can figure out how you use it. Basically, it's very simple. You just install it, and then you can look at my example of the INI file, which will sit in the root of your repo. That'll tell it what to do. Flake8, you can also just pip install and run it anytime. Black as well, you can pip install. Coverage, you can pip install. And CodeCov is another service like Travis CI, cloud service, that once Travis CI is done running everything, all your tests for you, and they pass, then it'll pass it over to CodeCov to look at the test coverage. So you can follow through on any of those if you want to. And to actually configure Travis CI is pretty straightforward, but I also gave you a link here to do it with GitHub. In my case, I'm using GitHub and Travis CI together. Basically, all you have to do is get your repo set up, and then go to Travis CI and log in with your GitHub account, and then you can, you'll associate your GitHub account with Travis CI, and then you'll select the repos that you want it to run against. So the configuration files are really, that's everything. You have to configure a Travis file. You have to, in my case, I want to also use Tox, so I'm going to configure a Tox file. And the setup CFG will sort of set up any rules that you may want to bypass for PEP8, or any part of your code that you don't want. You really want to ignore PEP8. So sometimes people ignore PEP8 rules for their tests, which I don't necessarily agree with, but sometimes they do that. So the workflow is basically, you've got, at least I'll explain how I do it. I've got a clone of my repo on my machine. I'll make changes locally. I will push those changes to my GitHub repo. GitHub will then hand that off to, will trigger Travis to run the tests on my repo. And if those all pass, Travis CI will hand it over to CodeCov. And if everything goes well, then these badges that I've got, for example, up here, will nicely turn green. So this badge will go to Travis here. So as you can see here, this is the repo we're talking about. And based on my last push, when I just changed something in the README, it ran all the tests for this matrix of versions. So Python 3.7, Django 2.2, 3.7, Django 3, 3.8, Django 3, 3.7, Django, what they've got on, their bleeding edge at the moment, their development version, and same for 3.8 and development version. And that's also nice that it's doing this, because if I already start to see that my code is failing on what their next, their pre-release might be, then I can also start to prepare for anything that's either going to be deprecated or something like that. I can prepare. So this is what you normally see. And if you go into any one of these, you can sort of see the log of what ran. And you can see that all, there's there are very few tests, but they all passed. And then it hands it off to CodeCov, and everything's fine. If something goes wrong, like one of these over here, you'll get this where it failed, and then you can go and look at the log and see where it failed for whatever reason. So in this case, I didn't install.
So if you if it actually fails, does that mean that like the push fails, the commit fails? Is there any method to make sure that code doesn't doesn't still infect the base?
Okay, so the code that I'm pushing at the moment is not actually, it's not actually running to production yet. So that's one thing. But when it fails, normally what I find, and you can interrupt if that's not exactly your question, but I might have on my machine, Python 3.8 Django 3, for example, with all the different modules that dependencies that my application depends on at their different versions, and everything works fine. And I run the tests and they all pass. But then I pass it off to Travis CI. It's now taking it from, I'm on a Mac, it's going on to a Linux box, so it's a different operating system. And it's going to do the matrix of different versions for both Python and Django. And then something breaks, which I wouldn't be able to detect on my own machine as efficiently. I might be able to build all those versions, I guess, technically, but not as well. So usually it breaks for something like that. I think that as a coder, I should try to make sure that everything, to my best of my knowledge, everything passes before I push it. But there might also be people that just push it and let Travis CI tell them that their tests don't pass, depending on if they're trying to save resources. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. So why don't we just take a quick look at what we need to configure in order to do something like this. So if I go back up to the repo here, so it's a pretty simple repo. It's just, if you've ever used Django, it's pretty much looks like a Django. You got your models and your forms and so on. So in the root of the project, let's first take a look at, so we got 3 files that we're interested in: the Travis YAML file, the tox.ini, and the setup config file. So let's look at the setup config file, which will just probably ignore some PEP8 codes. So that means that when I run something like Flake8 or something like that to check whether I've violated anything in PEP8, it's going to ignore any of those errors. And you can look up these codes to figure out what it is that I'm ignoring. You can also, when Flake8 fails, it will give you a code to tell you what you violate, and then you can make a decision whether you want to ignore that or not. And if you do, then you can put it in here. What a lot of people do is they also want to ignore the 79 character maximum line length. And then this one here is about complexity of any code that you write, the McCabe complexity value, which I set to 10. And then I'm ignoring the Django migrations files because I don't write them. They're generated by Django themselves, so I don't really care if they're following PEP8 or not. So that's one file that's part of this equation. Another file will then be the tox file, which is here. And here in tox, you can see that, let's just look at this commands here first. So this is what it does. First, it's going to run Flake8. If that fails, Travis fails, and it'll stop right there. So the next thing is that it's going to run my tests, and it runs it with coverage so that it will generate the test coverage information that CodeCov will use if everything passes. And if that passes, then it goes to the next step, which is to run CodeCov, to pass it off to CodeCov. And just before it runs these commands, it's going to build an environment for me. So I'll tell it to, I have a requirements file, so it's going to install everything in the requirements file. It can install, and you can put anything you want here, but then I've got it to install some things that I just use for tests. I want to keep that separate from my requirements file. I want to install coverage because I'm going to use it here. And I'll install the CodeCov package because it'll get used there. I'll install Flake8 because it's going to be used there. And I'll make reference to Django here, which Tox will install according to the matrix of environments that I'm going to run. So then these are the environments, so you can write them this way. So 3.6 and 3.7 for Django 2.2, 3.7, 3.8 for Django 3, and 3.7 and 3.8 for the trunk version. And then written out for Travis will be this here, where you have to be a little bit more explicit. I'm pretty sure there might be a way to do it more compactly, but I think this is how you can do it. And it'll then run all these environments. Now I can also run each one of these individually on my machine. If I write just tox-e and I make reference to pi36-Django 2.2, it will run it on my machine in those with that environment. One thing I didn't say about Tox is Tox actually builds on the fly. When you run it, it builds the environment according to your specifications, runs all the tests, then destroys the environment. So that way you could, if you wanted to, one by one, do these on your own machine and it will build them. But if your machine doesn't have Pi3.6 available to it, or it doesn't have Pi3.7, then they're gonna fail.
So just as how does it build the environment? It looks at like Anaconda has different Conda environments. It uses those, or does it work with virtual env? Do you know some details how it does this?
I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that it's going to pick up the Python version from the Conda or from the environment that wherever you're running it. So if you're running it within Conda, like if you have a Conda environment for Python 3.8, then I think it's going to pick up the 3.8, but it's not going to, I'm not sure if it'll pick up the other versions, but yeah.
So, but you're saying it builds it. So I'm trying to figure out exactly how it builds. I understand that they configured it if you do this remotely, but you said you can do this locally. So
Yeah, it'll download everything. It just says if you're building your own environment, it'll do it. So
okay,
maybe
so,
it could be using like virtual env in the background or something like that.
okay, got it.
Or
Thank you.
or something, yeah.
That's good enough answers. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the talks file. And then the next file being the Travis configuration, which here, some of this stuff is not necessary, but I just left it in for demonstration purposes. But the main thing is that the language is Python. And then when we run it, it's going to, I'll have it upgrade pip, which is a constant problem. And then, so this is now Travis, right? And then it can install these different packages for me. And then before the script runs, it can do this. If I'm using MySQL, I left that in there, even though this package doesn't, this package I have is not using it. It'll create a database for me. That's useful for me because maybe on my machine, just to quickly get through tests, I'll use SQLite, but I really don't want to go to production unless I know that my tests have run on the database that I'm using. So in this case, it would be MySQL. And that's the main script it's going to write. And here's the matrix of the environments it's going to pull out of the talks file. And then after it's done, it'll run the code cub. Yeah, and this is the version of Ubuntu that it'll run on. And you can set these up for different versions if you want. So those are the three main configuration files. And I put some links down here for you if you wanted. This one's real straightforward, just how to get started with it. This one's useful here because it shows you some variables that are available to you. In particular, you might want to conditionally do something different with the so that your tests know whether they're being run on your machine or whether they're being run on Travis. So there's some environment variables here that you can grab when Travis is running. To actually one just called Travis, which is set to true if it's running on Travis, but if it's not running on your machine, then it'll be set to false, and you can do some conditional settings or something like that for your tests. And then this is just a basic discussion about continuous integration, not necessarily tied to Travis. Yeah. So if you're interested and you wanted to, I think I've given you everything here you need to set up this application. And if you wanted to clone it into your repo, then you could see if you could get it to work with Travis from your own repo. Yeah. So with that, I don't know if you want to see something happen or something like that, but that's about it. It's just
yes, please show us a demo. But people ask questions before. Do you have any questions before a demo live there? No one has questions? Anyone?
So how easy is it to, implement this environment to a big team? Like, is there any challenges in getting this set up for 30, 40 people or 10, 20, or however big the team is? Or is it how scalable is it?
Oh, I would think it's extremely scalable because you're just pushing to, as many people as you can connect to a shared GitHub repo. How it then connects to Travis, that's between GitHub and Travis. You're not even involved. Once you've configured it, you're not involved in that anymore. So the only thing is that I think if you have a lot of modules that you're pushing at the same time, I think it does throttle you a bit sometimes, only allowing your particular account to run so many, so many at a time. So if I can show you, if I can just follow my badge here. so if I have all of these here and you know, I'm going through to try to get these all to pass, they all have one little common problem. So if I go through all of these and get them to pass, and I just, you know, every like 15 minutes, I'm pushing another one and another one and another one and another one and another one, I will start to notice that Travis is really going to only run about 3 at a time. And then it'll wait until they're done before the other one comes along and starts up. So I'm sure that with this is the free account. I'm sure with a paid account, you probably get more resources available to you. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think there's any issue around scaling.
Thank you.
You happen to know if this works with GitLab, not just GitHub?
I think it does, yeah. I put on the, so on here, if you follow the getting started with GitHub, but you'll also see here that Bitbucket and I would assume GitLab's in there somewhere. I see GitHub and Gitbucket. Yeah, I'm not sure about GitLab, but yeah, go through here and you'll probably find, anyway, you can categorize, you can figure out what they're really supporting. Although based on that, it looks like GitHub, Gitbucket. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I guess you can show us a live demo unless someone has another question.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go to my desktop now. Get you guys out of the way. So it is pretty straightforward. If I were to just, so let's say I just make a change to the, you know, to the README file or something like that. So this is the README file, and I don't know, just change anything, put an extra space there or something like that, and save it. And then I can just commit this and push it. And then if I go to Travis, I should see at some point it will start to run. Let's just go here and make sure that I actually did push it. So if I refresh this, I'll see that this just came through. And if I follow this, there, now you can see it's running because it's turned yellow. And if I go to one of these, at some point it'll kick in and start to build. Yeah, there it goes.
While it builds, unless you want to point out things that are happening, can you tell us what this application does in more details?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I can actually, this was it running. Let me run it again. So it's not really an app. This is an application that I embed into a trial system, but it is pretty much self-contained so that I can embed it in several, and all I really have to do for those applications is just provide a URL that points into it. And so it's just a data collection tool for knowledge, attitudes, and practices of trying to figure out, categorize the people that we're dealing with and what are some of their beliefs around coronavirus or COVID-19. So it's just a number of questions that go through, and inside this there's some logic to make sure that things that we can anticipate as being incorrect are dealt with, but otherwise it's just that, and then it's a matter of submitting it, and then they get back into the flow of whatever else they were working on. That's it. That's all it is. It's just a simple form.
Well, let's go back to Travis and see what was going on. Is it finished?
So as you can see, it built the whole environment, then it passed the little tests, then it passed it off to CodeCov, and everything was happy for the Python 3.7 Django 2.2. So if I go back and look at, yeah, it's passed them all, as you can see here. And if I look back at the project, well, they were green before, but they are still green, and it's passing, and CodeCov reports 96% code coverage. So you can also go and look at that, and it can tell you that your tests are. This is not very useful because there's not really that much testable in what I wrote here because it's just very basic Django stuff. So, but yeah, it's telling you that where the coverage is, it breaks it down. I don't know if you've ever used CodeCov, but it tells you where your tests are touching. So, yeah. So if you wanted to build it, you can build it here. Just clone it, and then I use Miniconda. So just install Miniconda, set up the environment, activate it, clone the repo, install the requirements, migrate the database, create a user account, start the test server, and there you are, and you're up and running.
What you're showing now, start the user, this is for the application or this is for the tests? Like,
so this is just for, Django provides this as a test server. When I actually deploy, I use Unicorn and Nginx. Yeah. When I deploy in production.
okay, so this is the application.
Excuse me?
If you're familiar with Jenkins, can you comment on any differences?
I haven't used Jenkins. No, sorry about, yeah.
No problem.
There's also Circle CI is another one that I see some projects that I use and do a little work with. I noticed that a couple of them switched over to Circle CI. Don't know why. Not really sure.
As for Jenkins, Jenkins is a very, very big engine. This seemed to be, I didn't use I cannot compare all the differences, but like this seems to be automated using scripts. Jenkins has also a lot of big interface.
Who knows? They might be running Jenkins underneath, you know.
I wouldn't be surprised that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if libraries are using libraries that someone else made. It's all fair.
Yeah.
Anyone has any more questions or anything else? I'll wait a few more seconds and then I'm going to stop the recording, and then everyone can mingle and talk more openly. So, questions going once? Questions going twice? Well, Erik, thank you very much for giving us a very nice overview of Travis CI, and we're going to put this one online at the end unless someone has any issues or wants to add some corrections or anything. So you'll find it on YouTube in our channel. So thank you again, Erik, and stick around. Don't go away. We'll continue chatting.